The Women's Leadership Group, or the Women's Leadership Committee, was developed really because there was a perceived need to increase the number of women who were members of the Society of Biological Psychiatry. What happened after that, this was sort of early 2015, late 2014, early 2015. What happened after that was that we realised that there was much more of a need than just to increase the female membership. There's a need for a kind of leadership group within the women and for the women, by women, for women, in the society. And the leadership, particularly at the senior level, you can think of the analogy of an old boys club or an old boys network. We talk about that with a smile, but they exist informally. Nothing like that has ever existed in our field for women. So we kind of formed this leadership group to really help us as senior women in psychiatry to kind of think more about our leadership roles, how we could be better leaders, and also how we could encourage more women and younger people to want to come into psychiatry. And since then, it's evolved into a much bigger committee, obviously, so much so now that we have events that are open to the whole of the meeting attendees, men as well as women. So the vision for the Women's Leadership Committee that I think I and others would have would be that, well, I have to say this with a smile on my face, ultimately, that there wouldn't be a need for the committee, that we'd make ourselves extinct because we would have done our job. But at the moment, the immediate goal is to really raise awareness of the problems that women scientists in particular face at every single level, not just at the junior entry level, but at intermediate and at senior levels. And the phrase leaky pipeline, which has been mentioned during the meeting, I think is a very apt description of the problem. You know, there are women that start, many women want to start in science and in psychiatry, for example, and in medicine. And then there's a problem. They sort of get so far, and then they feel they can't get any further for whatever reason. So it's almost that they fall out of the pipeline. And then, of course, that has an effect on dissuading other women from getting into psychiatry or science or the field. So our vision in the leadership group is to stop that pipeline being leaky. And to do that, what we want to do is have a series of events, such as a luncheon, where we're raising awareness of the problems that women in our field particularly face, and also providing solutions. So we're not just raising awareness of the issues and problems, but also as a group providing practical solutions to the problem. So the vision is to do that seamlessly and ultimately make ourselves extinct because everything's equal, women don't need to worry anymore. And also to apply this to diversity in general, not just women, but underrepresented minorities. So that's a big wish. And that's a goal, but I think it's a laudable goal. Being a female in the psychiatric world, being a female in any science world, has obviously made you not anonymous, made you stand out, simply because there are fewer of you. So that comes with many disadvantages, so obvious disadvantages. I mean, I'll give you a sort of concrete example. When I was a junior researcher, you go into a canteen and you sit down and there would be mainly men sitting around the table. You might be expected to go and get the coffee, even though you were, an assistant professor, or they sort of changed the topic of conversation as if, what they were talking about was top secret, and suddenly you were a spy and they couldn't share it with you, and they sort of dumbed down the conversation so that you could understand. That's kind of insulting and negative, and it happened quite a lot, and you have no choice but to put up with it and somehow enable yourself to be part of the accepted club, the group. And that took courage and time. But that was a negative experience. There were several other, perhaps even more negative experiences, but that's kind of an example. Positive experiences of being a woman, well, stems back to being anonymous. One, or lack of being anonymous. The advantage of not ever being anonymous is that you never fade into the background. People will always notice you, and people will always remember. You have a higher chance of remembering your name than they would, say, a male colleague at the time, because all the men look the same, and as a woman you look different. Now, that's a small advantage, and it's not an advantage I would cherish in comparison with all the disadvantages, but at the time that was the only advantage I had, so I made the most of it. And it's about, I suppose it's an example of taking advantage of opportunities. Not perhaps the greatest opportunity I would have wanted. I would have much rather had the opportunity to be part of the male club in the canteen rather than being singled out because I looked different. But you took advantage of any mere morsels. But I have to say that in more recent years, I haven't had so many negative experiences. I think that comes with being more senior. Since I've been a junior scientist in psychiatry and in clinical science, I have seen huge changes, particularly I would say in the last 5 years, and changes in the way that women are treated, women are allowed to progress. So to give you some anecdotes, or sort of some personal history, when I started in psychiatry, which was a long time ago, over 20 years ago, while there were women entering psychiatry, most women did not go into research. Most women sort of didn't even get to senior levels of clinical education positions at all. If they did, they were in the minority, and it was often things were very difficult for them. That's now changed. There are far more women going into psychiatry, and I think in other areas of medicine, than there were when I started, but also there are more women feeling enabled and feeling empowered so that they go into research and take on leadership roles in education and leadership roles in clinical work. The number of female chairs of department has dramatically increased. I think up until the last 3 to 5 years, I couldn't think of 5. I don't think there were even 5 female chairs of psychiatry in the whole of the USA. Now there are more than 5. So it's still a minority, but it's a dramatic increase, a significant increase. So what's made that happen? I think raising awareness of the problems such as the implicit bias, the leaky pipeline, just raising awareness and making people, men and women, it's not only, problems don't come just from male colleagues, they come from female colleagues too. Raising awareness of the problems and providing solutions and enabling women to come through. I think the younger generation is more egalitarian and less prejudice, more aware of issues such as gender bias, implicit bias. They are also, I think, more gender race blind. I'm not saying they're totally perfect, and there are still instances of prejudice there, and there are some implicit biases that take a long time to disappear. But I do notice that the younger generation is more accepting, just more, you hear comments like, I never think about the female-male issue. It doesn't occur to me to think in terms of whether they're female or male or whether they're white or black or whatever. You hear that more often from junior colleagues. Now, whether deep down they believe it or not remains to be seen, but I see evidence that actually the younger generation is more liberal and more egalitarian, at least in my world. And that probably just comes from years and years of struggling in the field, if you're in the disadvantaged group, and also making these problems more aware, so more people are aware of them. It's got a long way to go, but I do think that the younger generation is more egalitarian-minded. So this issue of advocacy, having a good mentor, having a good promoter, almost like having a PR person who's on you, like an agent almost. It's so important, it's critical, and particularly in the science world right now, it's very competitive. And you can't, as a junior person, you can't do everything for yourself. You just don't know where the pitfalls and problems are. So it's critical to have an advocate, regardless of their race, regardless of their gender. That said, I have to say that traditionally women have found it more difficult to find an appropriate mentor and an advocate because of all the implicit biases that we just talked about. And so I think that's compounded the issue. If you don't have an advocate, you're going to have that much more of a difficult time navigating the really difficult world of science. I have to say I did have some good mentors when I was young, not consistently, and they were all male. Some were excellent, 1 or 2 were not so good. But the good ones, what they did, they were gender blind. They did not think of me, at least I'm assuming they didn't. They didn't think of me, Mary the woman. They thought of me as Mary the scientist who does this. And that's what made them stand out. The ones who were not so good thought of me as Mary the woman who, it's good for my portfolio to have a woman as a mentee. So those are the less good ones. But having an advocate is better than having none, I would say. At least in my experience. And then, of course, the onus then becomes on our generation to be good advocates of younger people. One of the most exciting and most rewarding aspects of my job is mentoring, and actually men and women. In fact, I like to think I'm gender and race blind. So my lab is pretty mixed. But I love the mentoring, and for the reasons we've just said, bringing people forward, enabling people to grow and reach their potential. It's incredibly rewarding, and you feel that, always at the back of your mind there's the thought, this person could achieve more than I could, and I would feel like a parent, proud. And it's a lovely experience. So I think people who don't want to be mentors in science, they might want to question their reasons why they don't want to be mentors, because that's a crucial part of science. And I think it's particularly important for women to have a good mentor and advocate, to sort of help navigate science and all the implicit biases that they're likely to come across even now.